The training range stretched out in silence, an open field cut by the smell of burnt gunpowder and the faint echo of distant shots that had already faded into memory. I stood at the far edge with my rifle slung low, watching the dust settle where the last bullet had bitten into the sand. Around me the place was deserted except for one figure. She was seated at the firing bench, head bent low, her black hair tied tight under a faded cap, her fingers resting lightly on the scope of a rifle that looked too heavy for her frame. Yet she held it with the kind of familiarity that spoke of years, not days. She hadn't fired in minutes, maybe longer, but she didn't move either. Just breathing, still, as though listening for something none of us could hear. I had been told about her before, only in whispers, never with names. A woman who didn't belong to any platoon, who carried no insignia, but who showed up at the range every time the unit rotated through this part of the base. No one talked to her. No one knew where she came from. They called her silent, they called her ghost, they called her the kind of thing soldiers invent when too many nights stretch out under too few stars. Yet here she was, flesh and blood, and the quiet around her carried a weight heavier than any of our weapons. At first I kept my distance. Something about her presence made the air dense, like I was intruding on ground not meant for me. I reloaded out of habit, fingers checking the bolt, chambers, sights, but my eyes stayed on her. She hadn't looked up once. Her rifle was already set, bipod dug into the dirt, scope glinting faintly in the weak light. I thought maybe she was waiting for someone or something, but then I realized the truth. She was listening the way an old wolf listens to the forest, sensing movement no one else can. The silence grew heavier. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, brushing the grass only lightly before falling still again. I shifted on my feet, boots grinding the gravel, and for the first time she moved. Just a turn of her head, just enough for one eye to catch me from beneath the brim of her cap. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't welcome either. It was the kind of look that stripped me of questions before I could ask them. I froze, rifle hanging uselessly at my side, and waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally she spoke, voice low, breaking through the hush like the crack of a twig in an empty forest. "Sir." The word carried strange weight, not the casual recognition of rank, not the empty respect of habit. It was sharp, directed, and when she followed it, my chest tightened. "Ghost Recon." The words echoed not through the air but through my head. For a heartbeat I thought she was mocking me, throwing some phrase meant to unsettle. But the way she said it, controlled, almost reverent, told me it was something else. Ghost Recon. A name, a unit, a shadow I hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. My stomach nodded. Nobody here should have known about that. Nobody except me. I swallowed, my throat dry, and forced my voice steady. "Where did you hear that?" Her eyes didn't blink, didn't falter. She shifted the rifle slightly, aligning the scope toward the horizon though she didn't look through it. "It's not where. It's who." Then she paused, letting the silence breathe again before finishing. "You." The ground beneath me might as well have tilted. I hadn't been called Ghost Recon since the night my unit burned out in an operation buried so deep it never made it to paper. We had been written off as dead, scattered across reports, erased from records. The ghosts had lived up to their name except one of us had walked away. Me. And yet this woman, a stranger, sat at the range with a rifle steady as a heartbeat, speaking the name like she'd been waiting for me all along. I stepped closer without meaning to, boots crunching softly, my body drawn in like a moth toward the flicker of dangerous light. She didn't move. She let me come until I was near enough to see the faint scars cutting across her cheek, lines too clean to be accidents, too deliberate to be ignored. She carried her history on her skin the way I carried mine in the shadows. "Who are you?" I asked more harshly than intended. Her lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. It was something older, something caught between bitterness and memory. "The last voice you were meant to hear," she said. Her hand brushed the rifle stock, almost tenderly, as if it were more than a weapon, as if it was the only friend she had left. I wanted to demand answers, to pull truth out of her in a rush, but something in her expression warned me not to. This was a woman who carried words like live ammunition, meant to be fired, not wasted. And if she had chosen to speak Ghost Recon, then there was a reason that might pull the ground out from under both of us. The silence returned, thicker than before, wrapping around us like smoke. My pulse thudded in my ears, but she didn't seem to hear it. Her focus was elsewhere, beyond me, beyond the range, eyes narrowing like she could see farther than the horizon itself. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing, just empty land stretching into distance. Then she whispered again, so faint I almost missed it. "They're coming." A chill lanced down my spine. I turned back to her sharply. "Who?" She finally looked at me full on, both eyes clear and unflinching. The ones who never forgot. The ones who never forgave. And just like that, the air shifted. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was the hush before storm, the breath before the shot. Somewhere deep inside, the old part of me stirred awake, the part one had buried along with the name she had just exhumed. Ghost Recon was alive again, and the woman who had sat in silence all this time had just lit the fuse. The air thickened with a tension I couldn't shake, a charge humming beneath the surface as if the earth itself was bracing for something unseen. Her words dug into me like hooks. They're coming, and suddenly the silence of the range was no longer comforting. It was a warning, an empty space waiting to be filled with noise we weren't ready for. I forced myself to breathe, steady, soldier-like, but my instincts were already waking, telling me this wasn't a coincidence, this wasn't some lonely woman repeating old ghost stories. She knew something. She knew me. And now she was dragging me back into the shadows I'd spent years escaping. I crouched beside her, rifle still loose in my hand, my eyes sweeping the horizon. Nothing. Just barren land stretching wide and unforgiving, the kind of ground where sound traveled far and you could see a threat long before it reached you. Yet my gut twisted because I trusted her tone. That wasn't paranoia speaking. That was certainty. How long? I asked quietly. Her cheek pressed against the rifle stock I fixed on the scope. She exhaled slowly, the kind of measured breath only practiced shooters make when the world is narrowing down to a single target. Minutes? Maybe less. A cold sweat traced my neck. Whoever she was, however she had found me, this wasn't some random encounter anymore. I scanned my own rifle, adjusting the sling, chamber checked, safety off. Old habits, instincts running without thought. It had been years since I'd felt that readiness in my veins, but it came back with frightening ease. You need to tell me who they are, I pressed. I won't fight shadows. She shifted her grip, her finger brushing the trigger like she was reminding herself it was there. They call themselves clean up, she said finally. Black sites, deniable assets, the kind of people who erase mistakes before anyone learns they existed. You weren't supposed to walk away. Ghost Recon wasn't supposed to leave survivors. But you did. That makes you a loose end. And loose ends don't stay loose forever. My jaw clenched. The past roared up like fire. The night of the mission, my squad moving silent through jungle so thick it swallowed light, the sudden ambush, the betrayal, the flames rising where there should have been extraction. I remembered the comms going dead, the screams cut short, the silence afterward heavier than death. I remembered crawling through mud with blood in my mouth, dragging myself away from the wreckage, swearing I would vanish so they'd never find me. And yet here she was telling me they had. Why are you here? I asked her, not letting the edge slip from my voice. Her eye finally pulled from the scope, and for the first time I saw something raw flicker there, not hardness, not distance, but a glimmer of something close to fear. Because I was part of it. Not the ambush. Not the betrayal. But the silence after. I watched you get written off. I stayed quiet. And now they know I didn't finish the job. The words hit like a rifle kick. She wasn't just some ghost at the range. She was tangled in the same web, caught in the same fire. I wanted to demand why she'd let me live, why she hadn't put a bullet in me when it would have been easier. But before I could speak, her body stiffened. They're here, she whispered. The sound reached me then. Low at first, a hum crawling across the flat land, growing into the distinct thrum of engines. My head snapped up, eyes searching the horizon. A black line cut across the dust. Vehicles, fast, armored, no lights, no insignia. The kind of convoy that didn't exist on paper. My grip tightened on my rifle. Move, I ordered, snapping into command without thought. We can't stay pinned at the range. But she didn't move. She stayed locked behind the rifle, her calmness terrifying in its precision. You run, they'll hunt you. You fight, you might make it. Choose. I wanted to drag her with me, force her out of the open, but then I saw her posture, the way her rifle already tracked the lead vehicle, and I realized something. This was her battlefield. She'd chosen it. And like it or not, I was already in it with her. The first vehicle drew closer, dust boiling behind it, and I hit the dirt, scope raised. My breath slowed, everything narrowing to crosshairs and angles. The convoy was 5 deep, armored jeeps, windows tinted, weapons mounted. Professional. Efficient. Killers. Her shot cracked first. A clean, perfect round that punched through the windshield of the lead vehicle. It swerved, wheels tearing into the dirt before it flipped, rolling in a violent crash that scattered debris across the range. The convoy erupted in chaos. Doors slammed open, shadows spilling out, rifles raised. I squeezed my trigger, felt the rifle buck, and one of the figures dropped before he even knew where the shot came from. Training returned like it had never left. Angles, timing, fire, shift. The woman moved beside me with surgical rhythm, each shot deliberate, precise, lethal. There was no panic in her, no hesitation. She was built for this. Return fire lit up the air, bullets hissing over us, smashing into dirt and wood. Splinters flew, dust choking my lungs, but we stayed low, crawling, repositioning. My pulse hammered, but my hands were steady. We weren't two strangers anymore. We were a unit, forced into existence by the inevitability of death barreling down on us. One jeep swung wide, trying to flank. She pivoted, one fluid motion, and her shot detonated the front tire. The vehicle spun, rolling hard into the side of another, the explosion tearing through both. Heat washed over us, fire painting the night in savage orange. But there were more. Always more. Figures pressed forward, tactical, disciplined, not breaking under loss. Whoever they were, they had come knowing the price. And they wanted me badly enough to pay it. Between volleys I shouted, "We can't hold here. They'll box us in." Her answer was sharp, almost fierce. "Then don't get boxed." I bit back a retort, slamming another mag into my rifle, sweat burning my eyes. She shifted position again, firing with that same terrifying calm. And as I moved to cover her flank, it hit me with brutal clarity: we weren't going to survive this by running. We had to cut through. We had to become the ghosts they thought were already dead. The realization steadied me. My breath slowed, my focus sharpened, and for the first time in years I felt like Ghost Recon again. Not the broken survivor. Not the forgotten loose end. The soldier they had failed to kill. I turned to her, dirt smeared across my face, teeth bared in something too grim to be called a smile. "Then let's remind them what ghosts can do." Her eye caught mine, fierce and unyielding, and she gave the smallest nod. Then together we rose from the dirt, rifles blazing, stepping back into the war we thought we'd buried. The world had narrowed to muzzle flashes and the sound of rounds tearing the night apart. We weren't two lone shooters anymore, we were a storm cutting into their ranks. Each shot we fired found flesh, steel, or fear, and the convoy that had arrived with calculated precision was unraveling under the chaos we fed it. But even as bodies fell and vehicles burned, more of them came, shadows spilling from the smoke with the kind of discipline that marked them as professionals, not mercenaries. They weren't here for conquest or chaos. They were here to finish something, to erase me, to erase her, and to bury the last fragments of Ghost Recon once and for all. The ground shook with the blast of another jeep erupting into flame, fragments of metal whistling past as I ducked low, dirt exploding around me. My lungs were raw from the smoke and grit, but I forced air in, steadying, refusing to break rhythm. I shifted my scope, found the gleam of a helmet in the dark, and squeezed, clean, sharp, final. He crumpled before the echo had faded. Beside me she had already transitioned targets, her rifle singing a deadly cadence. Every time her finger moved, another man went down. It was terrifying and beautiful, a precision that made the battlefield bend around her will. We crawled forward, not away but through, weaving closer to the heart of the fight. It was madness, but retreat wasn't survival. These weren't hunters that lost interest. They would follow until the world bled out. The only way to live was to break them here, to send a message so violent that their masters would think twice before sending more. That thought carried me through the chaos, reminded me why my unit had once been feared enough to earn a name like Ghost Recon. Not because we were ghosts when dead, but because we became ghosts while still alive, unseen, untouchable, merciless when cornered. A grenade clinked against the dirt nearby. My body moved before my brain, grabbing her shoulder and throwing us both into the ground behind a mound of debris. The explosion ripped the air, hot metal tearing past us. I felt the sting of fragments biting into my arm, hot blood sliding down, but I shoved it aside. Pain didn't matter. Survival did. She rolled back into position almost seamlessly, eyes cold and steady, as if the blast hadn't even touched her. For a moment I wondered if anything could. "They're tightening the circle," I shouted, my voice cutting through the chaos. "We hold here, we're dead." Her jaw set, teeth catching the edge of her lip, and she fired again before answering. "Then we cut out." "Where?" I demanded. Her eye flicked to the west, beyond the smoking hulks of vehicles, to the jagged rise of terrain where rocks cut into the flat earth like broken teeth. "There." It was a long sprint across open ground, the kind of run that got you riddled with lead before you even reached cover. But she had chosen it with certainty, and I trusted that certainty more than I trusted my own doubts. I pulled a flash from my belt, thumbed it live, and hurled it into the densest cluster of advancing figures. The burst of white fire blinded them, broke their rhythm for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat we ran. Boots hammered dirt, lungs searing, rifles tight against our bodies as we sprinted through hell. Bullets whipped past, tearing chunks from the ground at our feet, snapping air beside our ears. One grazed my thigh, a hot line of agony, but I didn't stumble. She ran just ahead of me, faster than I expected, her movements fluid, like she had rehearsed this path long before I arrived. We slid into the rocks, stones scraping skin, bodies pressed into whatever cover we could find. Gunfire still chased us, rounds slamming into stone, sparking like angry insects. But we had broken their line of sight. For a moment, in the thin breath between volleys, there was space to think. I leaned against the rock, blood dripping down my arm and thigh, chest heaving. She crouched opposite me, reloading with that same unshaken calm. Sweat streaked her face, dirt clung to her skin, but her eyes were alive, fierce, burning with something more than survival. She looked at me not with question but with demand. "You feel it?" she asked, her voice low, urgent. I frowned through the adrenaline haze. "Feel what?" Her lips curved just slightly, bitter but almost triumphant. "The ghost waking up." I wanted to argue, to deny, but the truth was clawing through me with every breath. She was right. The part of me I had buried under false names, quiet jobs, years of trying to disappear, it was alive again. The soldier, the hunter, the ghost. And it wasn't just me. It was us, together, stitched by fire into something that felt terrifyingly inevitable. Before I could answer, movement flickered beyond the rocks. I swung my scope, breath locking, and caught sight of 3 advancing, silent, tactically clean. They were good but not good enough. 2 shots, 1 breath, and 2 fell. The third hit the dirt, rolling into cover, firing back. The rocks shuddered under the impact. She leaned around the opposite edge, 1 clean round, and his head snapped back in silence. We weren't out yet. But for the first time I felt the tide wasn't only theirs. "Why me?" I asked suddenly between reloads, my voice raw. "Why risk this? Why drag me back into it when you could have stayed hidden?" Her hands moved fast, efficient as she spoke. "Because I owed you. That night years ago, I was there. Not on the ground, not with your unit, but in the silence after. I saw the list. I saw your name marked for erasure. I could have pulled the trigger. I didn't." The words hit harder than any bullet. She had been part of it all along, part of the system that had destroyed my team. And yet, instead of finishing me, she had let me vanish. "Why?" I demanded, voice sharper now. Her eyes locked on mine, and for once there was no wall, no shield. Just truth. Because even ghosts deserve one chance to haunt the world that killed them. The night pressed heavier, but her words lit something fierce inside me. This wasn't chance. This wasn't coincidence. She had been waiting, maybe for years, and now the circle was closing on both of us. Gunfire flared again, sharper, closer. They were regrouping, moving in tighter waves. The rocks would hold for minutes at best. We couldn't dig in forever. I checked my last 2 mags, jaw tightening. "If we're going to haunt them," I said grimly, "then we'd better make it a nightmare they'll never forget." She nodded once, eyes burning like coals. And together, in that moment, we stopped being survivors. We became the storm. The rocks shuddered under the pounding rhythm of their gunfire, every impact shaking dust loose from the cracks above us. I pressed my back harder against the stone, rifle tight in my grip, listening to the measured bursts that told me exactly what kind of unit we were up against. These weren't amateurs panicking under pressure. They were trained, disciplined, advancing in calculated patterns to flush us out. It was the kind of approach I had seen before, the kind that never stopped until nothing was left breathing on the other side. My breathing slowed as I calculated angles, distances, odds that didn't look good no matter how I twisted them. Beside me, she was calm, terrifyingly calm, her focus unbroken as she swapped magazines and leaned just far enough to catch a glimpse of movement. She didn't waste rounds. Each pull of her trigger was deliberate, surgical, forcing the enemy to slow, forcing them to question every step. I realized then that this wasn't just skill, it was vengeance. Every shot she took carried the weight of years of silence, of choices she hadn't made but had lived with. "They'll pin us here," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. Her jaw tightened slightly, her eyes never leaving the scope. "Then we break before they close the trap." "And run where?" I snapped back, though I already knew the answer. "Through them," she said simply. It was insane. But in war, insanity sometimes became the only logic that worked. I checked my last mag, the metal cold against my palm, and nodded once. "On your mark." She didn't hesitate. She fired a sudden rapid pair of shots, breaking their rhythm just enough, and then she moved, fast, low, sprinting across the jagged cover toward the open. Instinct screamed at me to grab her back, to hold the line, but I followed. Ghosts didn't survive by waiting. Ghosts survived by moving where no one expected. We broke from the rocks like shadows unchained. Bullets hissed around us, smashing into the earth, sparking off stone, tearing through the space we had occupied just seconds before. I felt the burn of one graze across my shoulder, hot pain slicing, but momentum carried me forward. She was ahead, weaving, firing in bursts that kept the enemy ducking. I dropped low, rolling into prone, sighted two silhouettes flanking to cut us off, and fired. 2 shots, 2 bodies hitting the dirt. The air filled with smoke and fire as another vehicle erupted behind us, the wreckage lighting the night in orange and red. The battlefield looked like a vision from hell, flames dancing across twisted steel, shadows flickering like demons. And through it all, she moved with purpose, never faltering, dragging me deeper into the storm with her. We hit the next line of cover, a shallow ditch carved by rain long gone, and threw ourselves down hard. My chest heaved, lungs burning, every nerve screaming. She crouched beside me, her hair damp with sweat, her expression carved from stone. "They won't stop," I said, voice rough. "Even if we break this wave, they'll send more. They want me too badly." Her eyes flicked to me, sharp, burning. "Not just you. They don't leave witnesses, and now you've seen me." I stared at her, the truth settling cold in my gut. She had painted herself into the same target as me, willingly or not. For years she had hidden in silence, and in one night she had thrown that silence away. Whatever her reasons, whatever her guilt, she had chosen this. "Why now?" I asked, pushing the words out between ragged breaths. "Why speak Ghost Recon tonight? Why not stay silent forever?" Her face hardened, but her voice carried something deeper, something raw. "Because silence is death. I thought I could live with it, thought I could disappear in the shadows like they wanted. But every night I saw their faces, the ones they erased, the ones they killed. Your team, my orders. I didn't pull the trigger, but I let it happen. And I can't bury that anymore." The confession landed heavy, pressing against the roar of battle. She wasn't just fighting them. She was fighting herself, her own ghosts. And for some reason she had chosen me as the one to face them with. I didn't have time to process it. Figures were advancing again, shadows cutting through smoke, their weapons trained with brutal efficiency. She looked at me, eyes blazing, and said only one word. "Now." We moved as one. We rose from the ditch like wraiths, rifles blazing, every step forward tearing into their line. Bullets screamed past, but fear had no place here. We weren't running anymore, we were cutting, slicing, ripping through their control. She dropped 2, 3, 4 in perfect succession, her shots echoing like a drumbeat. I flanked wide, firing in bursts that kept them scrambling for cover. The line broke. For a brief moment they faltered, and in that moment we pressed harder. My rifle clicked empty, but before I could reload she tossed me a fresh mag without even looking. I slammed it in, pulled back, and we pushed again. Then the roar came, low, heavy, mechanical. My blood turned cold. From the smoke rolled something far worse than jeeps or shadows. An armored transport, black, hulking, its mounted gun sweeping the battlefield like a predator searching for prey. Her eyes narrowed, her breath steady, and she whispered, "They brought the hound." The gun mounted on the transport spun, and the night erupted. The ground shattered as rounds ripped into it, tearing the earth apart. We dove back into cover, rocks splintering, dirt raining over us. My ears rang, the world shaking with each impact. "We can't take that head on," I shouted over the thunder. Her gaze locked on mine, fierce, unyielding. "Then we don't. We take its eyes." She pointed, not at the machine itself but at the gunners, the exposed silhouettes braced on top. I understood instantly. Take the eyes, blind the hound. We moved again, splitting wide, using what smoke and wreckage still lingered to shield us. The gun swept, searching, but hesitation was its weakness. She fired first, a clean shot that dropped one gunner in silence. I raised my scope, squeezed, and the second fell before he even knew I was there. The mounted gun went still, the beast blinded, momentarily helpless. But the transport didn't stop. Its engine roared louder, grinding forward, crushing debris under its weight. They weren't retreating. They were driving straight at us. Her hand grabbed my arm, pulling me hard toward the deeper rocks. "We move. Now." We sprinted again, the ground trembling as the machine tore closer, its bulk looming like a nightmare against the firelit horizon. My chest burned, my body screamed, but the ghost inside me was alive, carrying me forward. As we dove behind another wall of stone, I looked at her, sweat and blood streaking her face, and I realized something with bone-deep certainty: this wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. And it had only just begun. The world outside the cabin seemed to fold into silence after the storm of revelations, but inside the air felt thick, charged with truths that no one could run from anymore. Michael sat hunched near the table, his hands clasped tight, the edges of his knuckles whitening as if his grip on himself was the only thing keeping him together. Across from him, Ilara stood in the half-shadow, her silhouette hard against the faint glow of a lantern. For the first time since he had met her at the range, her eyes did not carry the same veil of silence. Now they burned with the weight of a secret too long caged. Michael's mind kept circling the word she had whispered: Ghost Recon. It wasn't just a call sign. It wasn't just a classified reference. It was her life, her hidden soul, the ghost of who she once was. And now it was his burden too. He rubbed his forehead, trying to quiet the pounding questions. Why had she broken her silence to him? Why here, why now, in a cabin far away from the world? Her voice had cracked when she said it, trembling between resolve and fear. He thought of soldiers he had known, men who carried battlefields on their backs long after the wars ended. But Ilara, she carried something darker, something unfinished. She shifted closer, her boots whispering against the wooden floor. Michael, she said, her tone quieter, you don't understand what you've been pulled into. If they trace me here, they'll come for you too. He straightened, meeting her gaze. Then explain it to me. I deserve that much. You can't drop a bomb like that and expect me to walk away blind. For a long moment she didn't speak, her chest rising and falling as though every breath was a test of her control. Then she walked to the corner, retrieved a small weathered satchel and placed it on the table between them. With careful hands she unbuckled it and pulled out a faded patch, dark fabric, stitched with the emblem of a skull wrapped in spectral flames. Michael's breath hitched. He had heard stories whispered in the darker corners of the military, names buried under layers of classified dust. Ghost Recon was not just a unit. It was a myth, an elite squadron of shadows sent into places no maps acknowledged, executing missions that no government admitted to. This was mine, she said, her eyes fixed on the patch as if afraid of it. Once upon a time I was one of them. We didn't exist. Our mistakes didn't exist. Our dead didn't exist. She paused, her voice lowering. But our ghosts, they never leave us. The cabin walls seemed to close in around them, the sound of the wind outside suddenly more sinister. Michael felt the ground beneath his understanding shift. So what happened? He asked softly, though part of him dreaded the answer. Ilara closed her eyes as if summoning courage from a place deep within. We were sent on a mission off the books, a black operation so far removed from oversight that even our commanders couldn't have tracked us. Infiltration, extraction, elimination. Simple words for something that was anything but. We walked into a storm of lies and we walked out fewer than half. The ones who made it back, we weren't supposed to. We knew too much. And those who know too much. Her words trailed into silence heavy enough to crush the air. Michael felt the weight of it, the cold inevitability of how such stories ended. They turned on you, he said finally, piecing it together. She gave a bitter laugh that lacked all humor. Turned on us, erased us, hunted us. Ghosts hunting ghosts. And somehow I slipped through the cracks. I don't know if it was luck or curse. I've been running ever since. She leaned against the wall, the lantern light catching the faint scars across her arms, etched like battlefields across her skin. Michael's chest tightened. He understood now why her silence had seemed less like shyness and more like armor. She wasn't silent because she lacked words. She was silent because words could betray her, expose her, end her. And yet she had whispered them to him, as though something in his presence had cracked the armor. Why me? He asked finally. Why tell me? You could have stayed hidden. Her gaze softened, and for a brief moment the soldier's mask slipped, revealing the weary woman beneath. Because you saw me, she said. Not the shadow, not the silence. You looked at me and didn't just see what I was hiding, you saw me. And ghosts need someone to remind them they're still alive. The admission hit him harder than gunfire. For a long time neither spoke, the silence weaving between them with fragile threads of trust. Michael's mind spun, balancing on the edge between fear and something strangely like devotion. He thought of his own scars, the things he carried but never spoke of. Perhaps that was why her silence had drawn him, because he recognized it. If they come, he said slowly, if they find us, we face them together. No more running alone. Her lips parted, almost trembling into something like a smile, though sorrow shadowed it. You don't know what you're promising. Maybe not, he admitted, but I know what I mean. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the cabin as if the night itself disapproved of the fragile vow. Ilara's eyes flicked toward the window, her instincts sharpened by years of survival. It's not safe to stay here much longer. Once the storm clears we move. They'll be tracking me and if they're close, her voice hardened. Then blood will follow. Michael stood, feeling the burn of resolve in his chest. He had not chosen this path, but now that it was in front of him, he would not turn back. Not from her. She slid the patch back into the satchel, fastening it tight as though burying part of herself again. If you walk this road with me, there's no return. Ghosts don't forgive and they don't forget. He stepped closer, closing the distance. Neither do I. For a fleeting second, their eyes held, two broken souls standing at the edge of something greater than themselves. Then Ilara exhaled, nodding once, sharp and decisive. The choice was made. They were bound now not by silence but by truth. And far away beyond the storm clouds, unseen eyes were already watching, waiting for the ghost to slip once more. The storm passed by morning, leaving the forest drenched and heavy with mist, every branch dripping silver threads of water as dawn struggled to break through. Michael stepped out of the cabin first, scanning the treeline with the quiet alertness of a man who had been taught survival the hard way. His rifle hung loosely at his side, but his grip was firm, ready. Behind him, Ilara emerged, her satchel slung across her shoulder, her face harder now, more defined by purpose than fear. Whatever weight she had shed by confessing the truth last night, it was replaced with the clarity of someone preparing for a war that would not wait. Michael glanced at her, noticing how her eyes flicked to every shadow, every subtle sound of the forest. She moved like someone who had lived too long in the hunt, who understood that silence itself was often the loudest warning. The earth was soft under their boots, muffling their steps as they headed down a narrow path that cut through the trees. Michael spoke little, letting the rhythm of their walk carry the quiet, but his mind raced with questions that wouldn't leave him alone. Who was hunting her now? What did they want? Her death or something worse? And why did he feel like he had already signed away his life by walking beside her? After nearly an hour of weaving through the dripping forest, Ilara stopped suddenly, her hand raised. Michael froze, his instincts snapping tight. She crouched low, brushing her fingers along the ground. There, pressed into the wet soil, were prints, heavy boots, fresh, too fresh. She met his gaze, her eyes sharp with warning. "They're close," she whispered. The air seemed to thicken around them, every drop of rain sliding from the leaves echoing like a drumbeat. Michael tightened his grip on his rifle, his pulse rising. How close? She didn't answer immediately, instead moving ahead with feline grace, studying the tracks, the broken twigs, the disturbed moss. Then she turned back to him. "Hours, maybe less. They're moving fast." He nodded once, forcing calm into his chest. Panic was poison in situations like this. But deep inside, something twisted. If Ghost Recon really were the hunters, then they weren't dealing with ordinary soldiers. These were predators like her, trained in silence, bred for shadows. Michael found himself wondering how many of them she had once called brother or sister. Ilara pushed forward, leading them off the beaten path, deeper into the woods where the fog lay thicker, cloaking their movements. Michael followed close, his ears tuned to every unnatural break in the forest's rhythm. After another stretch, they came upon the ruins of an old watchtower, its wooden beams half collapsed, moss eating away at its bones. Ilara slipped inside first, motioning for him to stay low. Within the shelter of the crumbling tower, she crouched, pulling from her satchel a small device Michael didn't recognize, a palm-sized scanner, its faint screen flickering green as it pulsed. He leaned closer. "What is that?" She didn't look up. "Signal reader. Picks up encrypted comm bursts. If they're out there, they're talking to each other." Michael felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The device crackled, faint bursts of static cutting through before a broken, coded voice filtered across. Ilara's jaw tightened. "They're close," she muttered. "They've split into two squads. One circling east, the other west." She switched the device off, her hands trembling only slightly, then shoved it back into her satchel. "We can't keep running. Not like this. If they're on both flanks, they'll box us in before nightfall." Michael studied her face. There was no fear there, only grim resolve. "So what do we do?" She exhaled slowly, almost bitterly. "What I swore I'd never do again, we fight." The word hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Michael adjusted the strap of his rifle, checking his ammunition. "Then we make it count." For a moment, their eyes locked, and though the silence of the ruined tower pressed in, Michael felt the fire of her determination burn through it. She nodded once and together they moved out. The forest stretched endlessly, fog curling around them like smoke from an unseen fire. Michael's heart pounded, but his focus sharpened. Every lesson he had ever learned about combat returned like instinct, yet he knew this was different. These weren't enemies who stumbled into mistakes. They were hunters bred from the same shadows Alara had once belonged to. He glanced at her as they pressed forward. She seemed carved from steel, every step precise, every gesture speaking of discipline and scars. Yet beneath it all he sensed something fragile, something that still clung to humanity even after being drowned in the silence of war. They halted near a ridge overlooking a valley where the fog pooled thick and white. Alara raised her hand, signaling him to drop low. Through the mist, faint shapes moved, dark figures slipping like wraiths among the trees. Michael counted at least 5, each one armed, each one scanning the terrain with deadly patience. His pulse hammered in his ears. Alara leaned close, her breath warm against him as she whispered, "That's just one squad. The others circling behind us. We've got minutes." Michael nodded, steadying his rifle. But before he could raise it, Alara placed her hand on his arm, holding him back. "Not yet," she murmured. "We don't shoot until we have no choice. If they don't know our position, we have a chance." He swallowed, the tension of fire in his chest. "And if they do?" Her eyes, cold and sharp as steel, turned to him. "Then we become ghosts." The words cut into him, chilling and thrilling all at once. Ghosts. Not just a name, not just a legend, an existence on the knife's edge of life and death. He stared down at the figures moving like shadows across the valley and knew this was no longer her fight alone. It was his now too. The figures below moved with the precision of wolves, every step silent, every sweep of their rifles deliberate. Michael felt the weight of their presence press into his chest, a reminder that this was not a battle against ordinary men but against hunters who thrived in silence just as Alara once had. The fog made them spectral, half-seen phantoms, and for a moment he understood why the world whispered of Ghost Recon as if it were a myth. They were not soldiers. They were death given form. Alara motioned him backward, and they slipped down from the ridge, crouching low as the earth dampened their steps. Michael's heartbeat thundered in his ears, but he matched her movements, trusting her instincts. She had lived this before, survived what should have erased her. If there was anyone who knew how to outmaneuver them, it was her. They wove through the trees until she pulled him into the hollow of a fallen trunk. The wood was damp and moss-covered, but it shielded them from view. They crouched inside, breaths shallow, as faint whispers crackled through the air, distorted, inhuman almost, the clipped communication of encrypted headsets. Michael tensed, every muscle begging to move, but Alara's hand pressed lightly against his arm, steadying him. Her eyes told him everything. Wait. Time stretched like wire pulled taut, and then the shadows passed. The squad had slipped further east, still circling, still hunting. Alara leaned close, her lips brushing the shell of his ear with a whisper. "We can't outrun both squads. We have to break one before they close the net." Michael exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his nerves. "Which one?" She tilted her head toward the east, where the 5 figures disappeared into the mist. "The smaller group, lighter low doubt. They're the spear. Break it and the rest falter." He nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. There was no turning back now. Alara slid out of the hollow first, moving like water between the trees, and Michael followed, his body sinking to her rhythm. She was a ghost and he was learning to walk in her shadow. They stalked the hunters, their steps masked by the dripping forest. Michael watched her every motion, the way she used the terrain, the way her senses drank in the silence as if the forest spoke a language only she understood. Finally she stopped, crouched low behind a jagged outcrop of stone. Just beyond, the squad had halted in a clearing, scanning the fog with disciplined precision. Michael counted them again. 5. Their faces were hidden behind masks, their bodies wrapped in matte armor that seemed to swallow the light. One of them raised a hand, signaling, and the others shifted formation. They were preparing to sweep. Alara leaned close, her breath steady despite the danger. "We take them silent. Quick. No shots unless there's no choice." Michael's chest tightened. He had fought before, but never like this, never in the razor's edge between silence and death. Yet he nodded, trusting her. Alara moved first, gliding around the stone like a shadow reborn. She disappeared into the mist, and Michael felt a jolt of fear before forcing himself to follow. The clearing loomed before him, every heartbeat a countdown. Then it began. Alara struck the rear soldier first, her arm a flash of motion, the blade in her hand biting deep and fast. The man crumpled without sound, dragged into the fog. Michael's blood surged as he saw another turn, suspicion flickering. Without thinking, he lunged, slamming his rifle butt into the man's jaw with bone-cracking force. The figure dropped, convulsing silently. Chaos rippled through the squad, confusion breaking their flawless formation. One raised his rifle, but Alara was already there, slashing his throat in a spray of silence. Michael ducked behind another, wrenching his weapon away before driving a knife into the gap of his armor. The forest swallowed the muffled gurgle as he fell. The last soldier spun, weapon raised, but Alara and Michael struck together, her blade driving under his arm as Michael shoved him down with brutal force. Then there was nothing but silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Michael stood over the fallen, his chest heaving, his hands trembling with the rush of violence. He looked at Alara, her face pale but calm, her blade dripping in the fog. She wiped it clean on her sleeve, her eyes meeting his with grim acknowledgement. "One squad down," she whispered. "But the others will know. We've lit the fire now." Michael swallowed, glancing at the bodies. These were not faceless enemies anymore. They were proof of the life she had run from, the hunters that had once been her kin. A shiver ran through him. What now? Alara scanned the treeline, her expression carved from steel. "Now we disappear before the net closes. They'll converge here. We use that. We lead them away from the cabin, away from your world. This fight is mine, Michael. I won't let it bleed into yours." But Michael stepped closer, his voice low but unyielding. "It's ours now. You said ghosts need someone to remind them they're alive. I'm not letting you vanish back into the dark." For the first time since he had met her, her composure cracked. Her eyes glistened, not with weakness but with something fierce, something raw. She nodded once, as though accepting a vow she had never dared to hope for. "Then stay close," she said. "And don't stop moving." Together they slipped back into the mist, leaving behind the broken squad. The forest seemed to breathe differently now, its silence heavier, charged with the knowledge that the hunters would not stop. Michael could feel it in his bones. This was only the beginning. Somewhere in the fog, unseen eyes tracked their every move, and the net was already drawing tighter. The fog thickened as they moved deeper into the forest, turning every tree into a phantom, every shadow into a threat. Michael's breath came steady but tense, his rifle ready, while Alara led with the sharp grace of someone who had lived in this deadly quiet all her life. The forest floor soaked their boots, muffling their steps, but the silence was not their ally anymore, it belonged to the hunters. Michael could feel them, unseen but present, closing in from the west. They had taken the first squad, but the others would not stumble blindly. These were predators born of the same shadows that had shaped Alara, and they would not stop until she was erased. The thought tightened Michael's chest, but it did not slow him. He had chosen this path, chosen her. No fear would undo that now. Alara raised her hand suddenly, signaling for him to stop. They crouched low behind a boulder slick with rain. Her head tilted slightly, listening, and Michael caught it too. Faint crunches in the distance, deliberate, disciplined, the rhythm of boots that knew patience. They were being surrounded. Alara's jaw set hard and she whispered, "This is it. They know. No more running." Michael's heart hammered, but he nodded, forcing his nerves into steel. "Then we make them pay." She glanced at him, eyes burning with both warning and gratitude. "Michael, if we fall here, you need to understand, this fight was never yours to carry." But he shook his head fiercely. "You gave me the truth. That makes it mine." For a moment she looked as if she might protest, but then her shoulders lowered, and something like acceptance crossed her face. "Then we stand as ghosts." The first shot cracked through the fog, slicing past the boulder, splintering bark from the tree behind them. The hunters had found their mark. Michael ducked low, pressing against the stone, adrenaline surging through his veins. Alara moved like lightning, pulling a small device from her satchel, something round, dark, and humming faintly. "EMP charge," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Short range. It'll cut their comms and night optics. But once I trigger it, we're on raw instincts." Michael gave a quick grin despite the fear, his blood roaring. "Then we fight blind together." She pressed the charge against the ground, activated it, and a pulse of soundless energy rippled through the forest. In an instant, the faint glow of optics died in the mist, comms cut to silence. The hunters were blind now, but so were they. The forest erupted. Shadows lunged from the fog, rifles blazing in bursts of muzzle flash. Michael fired back, dropping one as he ducked behind cover, the smell of gunpowder searing the damp air. Alara moved with impossible precision, weaving through the chaos, her blade flashing silver in the dim light. She struck one assailant down, spun, and fired the stolen pistol of another. Michael felt the rush of battle consume him, every movement an instinct born of desperation. He dropped another figure, the recoil biting into his shoulder, and rolled as a bullet shattered the stone above his head. The night became fire and steel. Hunters closed in, their voices clipped, their formation broken but still deadly. Michael fought like a man with nothing left to lose, his breath ragged, his muscles burning. Beside him, Ilara was a whirlwind, her silence no longer armor but a weapon, her strikes swift, merciless. She moved not as prey, but as something reborn from the ashes of betrayal. Yet the hunters kept coming, shadows spilling into the clearing. Michael slammed the butt of his rifle into one, turned, and barely ducked the knife of another. The world narrowed to blood and fog, the rhythm of survival beating louder than his heart. He caught a glimpse of Ilara, her blade buried in one man's chest, her face streaked with rain and fury. She was magnificent, terrifying, alive. But then he saw it, one hunter slipping from the mist, rifle raised, aiming at her back. Ilara! Michael roared, lunging forward. He fired, the shot tearing through the silence, dropping the figure before the trigger could be pulled. Ilara spun, eyes wide, locking on his. For a heartbeat, everything froze, the storm, the fight, the world. Just the two of them, alive in a place meant for death. Then the moment shattered. A figure burst through the fog, slamming into Michael with brutal force. He hit the ground hard, the breath torn from his chest. The hunter above him was masked, his strength monstrous as he pressed a knife toward Michael's throat. Michael fought, muscles straining, but the blade inched closer. Then with a sound like steel tearing, Ilara was there. Her blade cut through the hunter in a single, savage arc, the body collapsing onto Michael before sliding lifeless to the ground. She hauled him up, her grip strong, eyes blazing. "Stay with me," she commanded. Together they fought back, shoulder to shoulder, until the fog was littered with silence and bodies. The last of the hunters fell, the forest returning to its haunted stillness. Michael staggered, his body aching, lungs burning, but he was alive. Ilara stood beside him, chest heaving, her face streaked with mud and blood. For a long moment neither spoke, only the sound of their breaths filling the broken silence. Finally Michael laughed weakly, shaking his head. "So, this is what being a ghost feels like." Ilara turned to him, and in her eyes was something he had not seen before, not just sorrow, not just resolve, but light. She stepped closer, her voice low, trembling with emotion. "No, Michael. This is what being alive feels like." The words cut deeper than any blade, and in that moment he understood. She was no longer just the silent woman at the range, no longer just the hunted ghost. She was Ilara, flesh and blood, heart and soul, and she had chosen to share her truth with him. Michael reached for her hand, and though it was scarred and trembling, she let him take it. The fog curled around them like the veil of another world, but here in this clearing of ghosts they stood together. Whatever hunted them tomorrow, whatever shadows still lingered, they had faced the silence and broken it. Two souls bound not by fear but by the choice to live. And for the first time in years, Ilara whispered not in fear but in hope. "We're not ghosts anymore." The end.